This week on Quality Digest Live, we chat with Bruce Hamilton of GBMP about hands-on lean learning.
Plus, why performance is more important than policy. That and more when we come back. And welcome back to Quality Digest Live for August 5th, 2016. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk DeSharm, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
He is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richman. We begin this week with a recent report from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, and the California Air Resources Board. These federal and state agencies announced that U.S. cars and trucks are well on their way to meeting fuel economy and emissions standards set for 2025. The story in which this report was quoted first appeared in the Product Design and Development website, and we linked out to it in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, although the government believes that these standards are achievable, automakers are a little less sure if they're going to be able to hit the 54.5 mile per gallon target that the government has set here
fleet target,
for 2015. Fleet target.
Fleet target.
Fleet target.
Across the entire fleet.
The entire fleet, exactly right. However, there's also a catch here that could cause these targets to move as time moves along, and that's maybe not surprisingly, maybe surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, lower gas prices. Sure. Recent savings at the pump are encouraging consumers to purchase less energy-efficient vehicles like trucks and SUVs. Pointing up this trend towards American auto purchasers choosing less fuel-efficient models, the article quotes information from Auto Data Corp, which shows that Toyota Prius sales, an example, are down a whopping 25% this year to date here in the U.S., while sales of SUVs and other light trucks are up 9%. Interesting, and that, I think it supports what they're talking about here. Because, of course, those types of automobiles, of course, the SUVs and light trucks, they're going to get fewer miles per gallon than models like hybrids, like Toyota Priuses. And thus, it's entirely possible that as 2025 draws nearer, these average MPG targets could very well need to be lowered to accommodate for that, because it just maybe just
right.
impossible for SUVs to get up to that level. Already, lobbying groups are queuing up to argue both sides of this case. The Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers is on record as saying that the current targets are too aggressive and they should be relaxed. While a Sierra Club spokesperson quoted in the article, on the other hand, believes that the standards are working and that technological innovation is the key to increasingly clean and fuel-efficient means of transportation, both now and in the future. The takeaway here, I think, is that gas prices are going to end up telling the tale, really, to a pretty large extent. If prices stay low, and continue to stay low, there's going to really be a lack of pressure on the American auto purchaser to choose fuel efficiency. And target standards for 2025 are almost certainly going to be knocked down to maybe below even 50 miles per gallon. But if gas prices return to $3 or even $4 a gallon, more people are going to choose hybrids and the like, and those targets are going to stay where they are. They may even move up. Who knows? I mean, it's kind of a fluid situation. So I think, as with most customer-focused targets, considerations of what's good for the environment, for the world in general, is going to generally take a backseat to what's good for individuals' pocketbooks. And that, that's what we always see. You have to motivate people to do the right thing. And yeah, if gas prices are here in California, which is very expensive, like $2.39, $2.35 a gallon. In other parts of the country, it's $2 or less. I mean, that's going to motivate people to want to buy Ford trucks and SUVs and stuff. I mean, it's not going to encourage you to just do the right thing just to do the right thing. People like trucks, they like big cars here in America, and it's going to probably be that trend.
Yeah, but it's also a little short-sighted, because I mean, I remember our old publisher, Scott Payton, had bought just a beautiful, I think it was a Expedition. It was one of the really big
I remember,
and it was just before gas prices went up. So at the time it made sense. It was a great car, had a family. I mean, it all made really good sense. And then gas prices went through the roof, and it was like, could not get rid of that fast enough. So I mean, that's the problem, is that you buy something right now saying, well, gas is only in California, $2.50, or maybe it goes down to $2.25 or whatever. So sure, I'm going to buy myself a big old F-150, and then it goes back up again, and now you're stuck paying
$100
to fill up the tank.
Or
I had to fill up my father-in-law's F-150. I stopped at $100.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't even full. I just went, I'm done putting gas in. I'm not going any further. I mean, this is like, I'm done with this.
Yeah, you're right. It's exactly the problem. So we'll see what happens. I think we'll keep our eye on that one, and hopefully gas prices do stay low. But I mean, other people think gas prices need to go up anyway. But it's cross currents as always in this.
All right. Well, what if someone came to you and told you that they could train you, teach you, to do your job faster and more efficiently? And that person had absolutely no experience or knowledge of exactly what it is you do. You'd think they were probably crazy, right?
Yeah.
Well, that is the experience that Bruce Hamilton writes about in his article, Lean by Doing, which describes his first experience with Shigeo Shingo's single-minute exchange of dies, or SMED. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it refers to a rapid and efficient way of converting a manufacturing process from running the current product to running the next product. And it doesn't have to be a die change, even though that's what the name refers to. It can be any production change. So Shingo was able to help companies, for instance, reduce these changeovers from hours to down to minutes, or sometimes even to seconds. And it's just a way of looking at your process. So with us this morning via Skype is Bruce Hamilton, president of GBMP and director emeritus for the Shingo Institute, home of the Shingo Prize. I think a lot of you are familiar with that. We talk about it a lot on the show. And also, Bruce is also a past recipient of the Shingo Prize in both the business and the academic categories. Hi, Bruce. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, or afternoon, Derek. Which side of the continent you're on. And Mike also, happy to be with you today.
Well, thanks, Bruce. Hey, in your article, you refer to not being able, yourself and your team, not being able to see ways to improve a CNC changeover operation because of, quotes, conceptual blind spots. And I believe a consultant was the one who gave you that term. Can you describe what was happening in your situation at that time and what a conceptual blind spot is?
Yeah, so incidentally, I just used setup, the setup example as an example, because it could apply to just about any changes that you're making in Lean. And in fact, the term conceptual blind spot is one that I took from one of Shigeo Shingo's books. He made this point early along that sometimes we just can't see because we're blinded by our predispositions, and that's what I was talking about. In the case of setup reduction, there was, even though we'd read Shingo's books and we had kind of a basic idea of the techniques, there was a fear on the part of the operators that we were trying to make them move faster. And if you talk to anybody who's operating a machine, rushing to do a setup is a scary thing. They're afraid of a crash or afraid of a safety problem. It just didn't make sense to them. Also, we had a conceptual blind spot that somehow or other there was some optimal level of inventory we could produce, and that was hard to get by, even though practically speaking, we could see that we were never seemed to be set up to make the right stuff. But talking about making smaller quantity just didn't seem to fit. You're making us rush to make smaller quantities. There's going to be, we see nothing but problems. And finally, a final conceptual blind spot would be that any road to Boston is okay as long as you get there. So we had a lot of issues around standardization as it applied to setups. But I'll give you one specific example. After the consultant began to work with us, a challenge that she offered to us. We were looking at, the tool holders, which have 4 bolts that have to be bolted onto a turret, and there's 6 of those on this particular CNC machine, each one of them with 4 bolts. And she asked the question, why 4 bolts? And the operators kind of looked at each other, and they said, well, because it requires 4 bolts. And she said, well, why does it require 4 bolts? And it kind of came down to because there's 4 holes. So this led to some brainstorming, and one of the operators said, we could replace 2 of those with pins, with guide pins. It would make it easier to get the tool holder back on, and we could just mount it with 2 bolts. So I think there might have been an engineer who said, oh, that'll never work because of vibration, and the manufacturer isn't going to like that. But anyway, we tried it, and it worked. So there's a particular example of 2 bolts taken out, 2 bolts reapplied. We wouldn't be changing tool holders on every single occasion, But this added up to, as I recall, about 20 seconds per tool holder. That was pretty significant. That was a bit of an epiphany for all of us because we'd never thought about that kind of change. We just figured there's some things that are fixed and we have to live with them, and there's others that we can change. So there's an example of a conceptual blind spot that our consultant from TSSC helped us through.
Okay. Well, I mean, so you said something there that I think was a little interesting. You mentioned that that the consultant in your article, you mentioned that the consultant knew little about CNC machining. So how could she, a person with no experience in that process or even CNC machining, tell you how to improve it? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, that was kind of a lesson in itself, and maybe this was something we had kind of figured out that I'd been saying for a long time, that it wasn't so much about the work, it was about the things that get in the way of the work. But she helped us to refocus on the things that get in the way of the work. It's just kind of a natural tendency to watch the work and turn a blind eye to the things that aren't working. If there are really big problems, then you see them, but if there are little delays and hiccups and sleights of hand to get something done, you sort of wish them away. And she helped us to watch for those. This particular person did have an industrial engineering degree. I would guess she was maybe 23 years old. She was the daughter of a Toyota supplier who was coming up to our site to practice. Okay, but what she knew that I didn't know was that all these changes were possible, and she asked endless questions. So it wasn't what she knew. She wanted to draw out of us what we already knew, but we're kind of not watching carefully.
Well, Bruce, you already described an interesting moment where you kind of got rid of 2 bolts in a process in a tool changeover, and got it down to from 4 to 2. Were there other moments or were there other events maybe where it kind of the dime dropped for you and all clicked in and you understood really how this process was intended to work?
Well, it was an interesting progression, Mike. This consultant came in. And for 2 days, she stood out at a particular machine. We'd agreed to work on one machine. She stood at a machine with a white pad, paper pad, to record things that the operators felt needed to be done. And for almost all of those 2 days, they ignored her. And she didn't press; she just watched and asked questions. But at the end of those 2 days, there was one item on the sheet, and it essentially said this machine needs an overhaul. And she says the machine isn't true, and it's impossible to set it up properly if it's not overhauled. And she said, "I'll be back in 3 weeks." And I said, "Well, I don't think I can get it done in 3 weeks." And she said, "Well, then I won't be back." So guess what? I got it done in 3 weeks, and it was a struggle because we weren't accustomed to operating that fast. This process is much more of a change for management than for the folks on the floor. They referred to it sometimes as dragging me through a keyhole, and it felt that way on occasion. But anyway, she came back after this was fixed, and the next time she left, there were 8 pages of things the operators felt could be done. And as an example, when one thing was done and there was a discovery, their confidence improved, and they started looking for more and more things. More and more ideas popped because, through this kind of tacit learning, we tried it, it worked. More and more persons began to kick in, and it was pretty exciting, actually.
Hey, Bruce, you have a Lean conference coming up soon, right? The Northeast Lean Conference in October. Can you tell us what that's about and what people can expect to see there?
Yeah, so thank you, and thank you for letting me talk about the conference for a moment. This is our 12th year for the conference, and we get about 600 or 700 folks at the conference. About a third from healthcare, actually, and 2/3 from manufacturing, and then other services as well. And this year's theme is exactly about what I'd written my article about. I absolutely believe that while there's a lot of good literature and videos, GBMP makes videos, but this is not a process that you can learn unless you get your hands dirty, unless you actually get into it and try it. And once you try it, just as in the example I was giving with SMED, once people get into it, all of a sudden, they're learning with their body, not just with their mind, and they're figuring things out So we dedicated this year's conference to themes that all deal with learning by doing. We have some, great speakers lined up. John Shook will be there, and Steven Spear, and then we get two great lean practitioners in Art Byrne, from formerly of Wiremold, and Dr. Eric Dixon, who's CEO of probably the largest hospital in central Massachusetts and a great lean leader. But we also have a lot of folks who are right off the floor, who are talking about things that they've done and what they've gotten. It's a great opportunity for sharing, and we've committed to having at least 50% of all the presentations with a takeaway or some sort of lean by doing exercise, so that we can, practice, kind of communicate through the conference this idea that the only way you really learn lean is by doing it.
All right, well, Bruce Hamilton, thanks for joining us this morning. And be sure to check out the conference that Bruce was talking about. You can look it up. It's just www.northeastleanconference.org, just as it sounds, northeastleanconference.org.
And there's a link in his article as well.
And there's a link in his article as well that you can click on and go out there and check out that conference. If you're involved in lean, it's probably something that you don't want to miss. So once again, Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
So long.
See you, Bruce. Thanks. Yeah, and if you know about lean and you listen to some of the names of the speakers that he ran through there, I mean, Art Byrne, John Shook, I mean, these are, and Bruce himself, I mean, these are leaders. These are really, really leaders, people that have been doing this for many decades here in the United States. In many cases, learned it directly from Japan, and these are some high-level people.
And actually, an interesting thing, and we've talked about this a lot. Interesting thing he mentions: a third of the people are from
healthcare.
Healthcare. It's such a growing, huge growth in healthcare in these in lean and so forth. Yeah.
Not a surprise. All right, thank you. All right, thanks, Bruce, for joining us. All right, well, Performance Not Policy. It's the name of our next article. It was written by Kevin Meyer, and it appeared in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And you know, Dirk, I've talked about this many times on the show. Kevin Meyer is really one of my favorite contributors. One of my favorite writers of people that contribute here to Quality Digest, because what he really does is he combines a lot of practical insights with an emotional heart. I mean, he's a human being. He talks about emotions. He talks about the emotions of the workplace, and he talks about how you can leverage that and work with that to have a more efficient workplace. Well, here he considers employee handbooks and what they communicate about the culture of the organization, which is an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, really, if you think about it, as he mentions, there's two ways to think about an employee handbook. The first one is really from a legalistic perspective, right? It's something that you can point to that the organization can use to protect themselves in case there's any kind of a legal suit from an employee. The second way, though, that employee handbooks can be used and are used, that's the third way. But the second way that employee handbooks can be used is to improve performance of employees, and ultimately to improve the company itself. And that's really kind of course, the high value. And overall, if you think about these two ways that employee handbooks can be used, to me, it's analogous to a standard. ISO 9001 is an example, right? I mean, you can either do it for just the basic legal reason, well, we've got to be registered and our suppliers or our customers demand it, and we aren't really getting value out of it, we're just doing it, versus looking at what it can bring you and looking at the document itself and learning from it and embracing that and bringing it into your organizational culture. And really, of course, that's the better way of doing it if you think about it. Well, from this really come, as you can imagine, two kinds of handbooks. The first is a very detailed and prescriptive. It's very much, again, that legalistic perspective of we're going to protect ourselves, we're going to cover our butts, and we're going to make sure that nothing can slip through because we documented everything in that handbook. The second way is really much more of a free-flowing handbook, where it says things like, act in the interests of company X, act in the interests of our company. You know what to do, kind of a thing. Where it doesn't really, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you have to do X, Y, and Z. It just says use your judgment. Do what you know is best for our company, for our fellow employees, and for our customers too. And that's very important. Now, obviously, if you're going to go with the second route, the second type of handbook, and many of us, I think, would agree that's probably a more efficient way to do it, what you really need is you need great managers. You need great managers who can find and hire and train great people, because really correct judgment in real time is the name of the game, and that's not something you can really just expect to have somebody know how to do. You know, you can't just have them walk in. Maybe you'll get lucky and they'll be a person of good judgment, but you're going to have to train them a lot to get there, and that's not so easy necessarily to do, right? And it's also not something that you can necessarily impart through a very prescriptive handbook. You know, you can't teach judgment from telling people, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that.
Right.
That doesn't really teach judgment. So it's kind of a limiting factor when you're looking at what you can get out of a handbook. You know, and this reminds me of a piece that we ran a couple of weeks ago, we talked about it on the show as well, is the time ever right to flout procedures? Remember that one? We talked about that article? Yep. I thought about that piece when I read this one, because that's also about making correct decisions on the spot in real time, about, you know, when you need to understand when you maybe need to go away from the procedures. You know, I mean, this is talking about the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, and those are two sometimes contrary things. I mean, there are procedures that literally, if you follow them to the T, will kill somebody in a certain circumstance, right? And there were instances in that article that we talked about where, yeah, things happened. People died because people followed a procedure too closely without using their judgment to say, well, maybe I really should turn this off. It says I shouldn't turn this off, but I think I should, you know, logically I should, but the flip side of that is if you do that, you go off the procedure and it doesn't work out, or there's even a worse outcome, who's on the chopping block? You are.
Right.
So there's a fine line here between using your judgment and understanding what you can and can't do, and being too, again, prescriptive in how you try to demand that from the top down. I mean, to me, it all comes down to the organization of your culture. I mean, the culture of your organization. If you have a culture in which, again, you've trained people really well, they understand what you're trying to do and why, in real time, they'll make a decision that will be the best possible decision. It may not work out. That's the thing, is you can't judge on outcome.
Right.
You have to judge on intent and what they meant to try to accomplish. Outcomes matter, but in this case, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to decide what kind of a culture you're going to have.
Yeah, you almost need to, you kind of alluded to it up front. You almost have to hire the right people too. Some people like to work in a prescriptive environment because it's your choices are easy. The choices are being made for you.
Right.
Some people like that. If you're going to leave it open to, you know, kind of discretion, and we're just going to kind of give you an outline, we want you to stay within the fence, but other than that, do what you want. Some people cannot work in that kind of environment.
You have to know, and you have to understand going in what you want, and you have to interview in the right way, and you have to ask the right questions. And then once you get them, they're not going to be finished products. You get them in your organization, then you got to train them right, and you got to go through. And it's kind of a risk management process too. You have to understand, well, this is our core of our business. This is what we've seen happen in the past. This is what we think could happen, and how would you address that particular circumstance? And you just train them on it.
Right.
It's never going to be perfect, but I mean, you have to decide again what kind of an organization that you want. You want one where really you trust your employees and you trust what they know and what they can do, or do you really try to control every aspect of it?
Which, strangely enough, leads into our our next article.
Imagine that, a segue.
Imagine that, a segue. Have you ever heard of a type T personality? I mean, I've heard of type A, but...
I've heard of type A, no, I have not heard of type T.
Well, it's a term coined by psychologist Frank Farley for people who search out novel, complex, intense experiences. We call them thrill seekers, right? So columnist Manfred Ketz de Vries discusses the type T, or thriller, personality in the workplace in his article, Managing Thrill Seekers. Adding to what a thrill seeker is like, de Vries says that they are addicted to stimulation. They're addicted to excitement and arousal. Only by taking extreme risks, by engaging in disinhibited behavior, will they obtain the exhilaration that they need, which is all well and fine in your private life.
Unless you're dating them.
Unless you're dating them, exactly. Strangely enough, that comes up. But what happens when a person brings this same need, the same thrill-seeking need, to the workplace? Well, says de Vries, it can be good or it can be bad, depending on how it's channeled. Now, for the bad, you might liken it to a bored child. Anybody who's ever been around a bored child knows what starts to happen. You know, they start to get fidgety. They cranky even. Sometimes they just need to stir things up, and they start getting into things. Well, the same thing is true of, let's say, an adult thrill seeker in a workplace. If they start getting bored with their job, they start looking for excitement.
Drama.
Yeah. And that drama can take a lot of different forms. Now, you know, for sometimes it could be just interrupting the workplace on a personal level. So an example that he gives DeVries gives in his story is a person who has an affair with a coworker's wife. Well, obviously, once that comes out, that's going to be pretty disastrous for the workplace.
Yeah.
Somebody's not going to go home happy.
Exactly, I would think.
But you know, there's other examples too. I mean, what if you have a key employee who is physically risky? You know, they do physically risky activities. They're always, you know, skydiving and bungee jumping and, you know, skiing black diamonds all the time. Now, you might say, well, gee, that's their business. That's fine. But if it's a key employee and that person is constantly involved in, let's say, thrill-seeking and risk-taking activities, you could lose that employee. Well, what does that mean for the company? So it's something that's got to be considered. Or how about even just risky moves on the company's behalf? And I'm thinking, you know, maybe financial decisions where this job isn't exciting enough. You know, I'm gonna make a risk, and it's going to be a financial risk, but I'm not worried it's going to pay off because I'm a thrill seeker.
Yeah, especially if it's a commission-based person, and they could potentially make a lot of money, but there's also a lot of risk, and the person may say, well, it's not really my risk that much, it's the company risk, but you know, I'm going to go for the gusto and try to make that big contract.
Because that is what thrill seekers are like, right? They're looking for that excitement. On the plus side, and there are a lot of pluses with thrill seekers, DeVries writes that given their knack for adventure, many of these people will have the ability to attain the highest levels of creativity and innovation in science and business and government and in education even, and that is just because they aren't afraid to experiment. Thrill seekers basically don't have fear. So experiment, go for it. Go out on a limb, peek around the corner. And companies need that, actually. You need a certain amount of thrill seeking in order to have innovation. You have to be willing to risk in order to innovate. But it has to be controlled risk. And that's the key. So how do you deal with these kind of thrill seekers?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go.
I was going to say, well, to me, and I mean, I know you're going to get to this, I think, but you need a mix of people in the organization. And because, I mean, you know, you need your thrill seekers, you also need your really cautious people to work with them and maybe rein them in a little bit. But, you know, if you have a whole team of cautious people, like you're saying, you're never going to go into those dark rooms and say, well, let's see what's in there and figure out a way to maybe have an innovative product or service.
Well, and it's funny, DeVries does talk about this a little bit. He says, you know, one way, and he talks a little bit about how do you, given that these are good employees in terms of productivity and what they do, given that you want to keep them, but you want to channel them, then one way to do it is to team them up with somebody who's more into rote. So, you know, you have a team and you have the person on the team who likes doing the day-to-day and the paperwork and maybe the nitty-gritty research, freeing up the thrill seeker to do the things that are exciting to them, that are innovative. And as you said, they kind of balance each other out. You also, as a manager, you have to realize that thrill seekers aren't going to be pigeonholed. So you got to get that out of your head right off the bat. And so what you want to do is you want to channel them into, you know, novel and stimulating and maybe even unconventional activities, unstructured tasks that require a high degree of flexibility. And I would say really heavy on the unstructured and flexible, because those two items alone will help keep a thrill seeker from getting bored, and it's going to present them with a constant challenge. You want to steer them into positions that are mentally challenging, particularly those tasks that make use of their own interest. By its nature also, DeVries says, work requires structure, which is just the opposite of what a thrill seeker wants. A thrill seeker does not want structure, including the manual that you were just you were just talking about, right? So as a manager, you need to help this person get organized and help them create some sort of structure to their work life while allowing room for spontaneity. And you can say, well, what the heck does that mean? It could be something even as simple as maybe you work out with them a certain time when they work on particular tasks, structured tasks that need to be done because the business needs those things to get done. But outside of those times, they can be involved in more free-form problem solving or design work, whatever, particularly if they're good at that. So basically what he says is above all, you don't want to write off these people just because they can be a bullet in a china closet. These folks tend to adapt easily to changing situations and roll with the punches. That's all about what thrill seeking is about, is being able to adapt. They also tend to get on well with people, even difficult people. And all of these can be a real advantage to the company. So given that you have somebody who's a thrill seeker, given that their work and what they do is advantageous for the company, and it's just the negative sides that you're trying to downplay, there are ways to kind of control the situation and give the company what they need in terms of structure and less risk, while giving that employee the freedom to do what they really do well, which is a benefit to the company.
You know what struck me when I read this article and listened to you talk about it? The job of a middle manager is tough. You really have to really deal with these nutty people, like Dirk. No, and you have to be willing to know. I mean, weaving together these different personalities and accepting people's, strange little quirks and
strangeness,
quirks and perks, and being okay with it. And again, not making everybody live with a prescriptive,
Did you say quirks and perks?
Quirks and perks.
Did you make that up?
I think I did. Yeah,
I like that. That's true, because when you think about it, every employee has their quirks
and their
perks. And the idea is how you take advantage of the perks while channeling and work around and shaping the quirks to fit in with the environment. That's good.
The quirks and the perks and the jerks. It's all.
And the jerks you try to get rid of.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thanks, Dirk. All right, we're going to come up to the end of the show now. We can't let you go, even though we're running a little late, without our famous tweet of the week. That's right. This one comes to us from Twitter user Murray Newlands. Murray, who asks, "You wouldn't slash your other 3 tires if you got a flat, so why give up on your goals just because of one setback? A thrill seeker wouldn't do that." So
a thrill seeker wouldn't do that.
Exactly. So there you go, and that's true, I think. So for more insightful tweets on quality management methodologies, and the power of persistence, not to mention AutoCare. That's right. Be sure to check us out at Twitter on Twitter at Quality Digest.
Well, that wraps up our show for this week. Thanks to Bruce Hamilton for joining us, and be sure to check out
the Northeast Lean Conference.
Yep, northeastleanconference.org, or there's a link to it from his article. If you're into lean, you want to check that out. Thanks for joining us this week, and we will see you next week on Quality Digest Live.
That's right. Have a great weekend.
So,
bye.